Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we're in Parshat Chaye Sara. As we've said, we are in the last third of every Torah portion now. And so last week in the last third, we of course had the end of the story of Hagar and Sara. And we have, at the very end of that narrative set, we have Hagar finding a wife for Ishmael, for her son. She finds him an Egyptian wife, and we know that he goes on to have 12 chieftains as his offspring, and many both of his and the tribes we're going to see later, the groups of peoples we're going to see later, descending from Abraham and Keturah. Many of them are well attested in the ancient Near Eastern literature, and so we know that these are peoples that lived in the region. So, as often happens with Torah, these peoples who had a relationship with early Israel of trading rights, probably social interaction, business interactions, some cultural interaction. These peoples get attached to someone who is attached to the Abrahamic family, right? So they express these business and social ties through a genealogy and through retrojecting kinship onto Abraham and Abraham's descendants, the early Israelites. Yeah? This is what they do. So this is how we get the 12 sons of Jacob. 12, tribes loosely confederated become the descendants of an eponymous ancestor who are all brothers. All of that is how Torah talks about peoples who had relationships with early Israel. So lots of these names attested over lots. It's a huge area that it talks about, from Arabia all the way up through northern Syria, going through the Fertile Crescent. So this is like a huge region that we're talking about, with lots of different kinds of small groupings that here get attached to Israel through an imaginary kinship structure and genealogy. That's why we get so many genealogies here. It's to explain early Israel's relationship with some of these peoples. So we did the end of the Hagar narrative last time. What we didn't do last time, but that was in the last third of last week's Torah portion, was the Akedah. Immediately after Hagar gets a wife for Ishmael, we have the story of Abraham taking Isaac early in the morning turns out Har HaMoriah is the tradition, the mountain where he binds Isaac to the altar and is about to bring down the knife on his throat, when, of course, the angel calls to Abraham to stop and not to harm the boy. I feel like it's important to know that happened before this, because now we're going to get some stuff about Isaac and Rebecca. And the rabbinic tradition spends a lot of time figuring out what's going on with Isaac here. We're going to look at some of that just to show you. And when I tell you there's a lot of discussion about this, I'm going to prove it this week. Just to show you a little bit about what I mean often when I say that, but also because it really is a place where the rabbis focus. They focus a lot of attention on one word in Torah that we're going to see in this morning's parsha. But we're picking up, so Chaye Sara begins, the beginning of our parsha is Sara dies, and that beginning sentence of this week's parsha immediately follows the story of the Akedah, right? The binding of Isaac. So the end of last week's parsha, end after Hagar, is the Akedah. The beginning of this week's parsha is that Sara dies. Chaye Sara means the life of Sarah, meaning the totality of the days of the life of Sarah were, because she dies. And so if you listen to my sermon at Rosh Hashanah, the rabbis connect the fact that the very next thing after the Akedah is the death of Sara. That is causal for the rabbis. That is not an accident. Sara dies because Satan tells her what's happening with her son and with Abraham, her husband. Now, if we follow on the mood of last week's reading of the Parsha, already last week we might have had, you could imagine some tension between Sarah at that point, Sarah and Abraham around the raising of Yitzchak, right? Possibly she's not terribly pleased with the circumcision business that his invisible God told him to do to his son, which was an Egyptian practice and other people's, but not Mesopotamian. If that's the case, one has to ask, Abraham and his son get up early in the morning and they leave for the Akedah. They leave for the binding that's about to happen. Sarah gets up. She makes coffee. She makes Abraham his coffee. She makes Isaac his cereal. And where are they? Even if one assumes there are servants who took care of that, one would assume Sarah would know the location of her only son at some point in the day. Ishmael's been banished. Yitzchak is clearly the heir, her only heir. So she, at some point during the day, must have said, so, anybody seen Isaac? Where is he? He was supposed to take his medicine at 3:00. I haven't seen him. Right? What are they gonna tell her? Okay, well, he got up this morning really early with Abraham and they left. All right. Has she been told where they're going? We don't know. Has she been told what's happening? We don't know. Does Abraham lie to her? We don't know. But what we know is it takes them 3 days to get there. So not only is he gone that day, but then they don't come home that night. She gets up the next morning and they're still gone. That whole day they're still gone. That night she goes to bed, they're still gone. The next day she gets up, they're still gone. That whole day they're gone. She goes to bed, they're gone. So we have to imagine Sarah, if she knows what's happening, is really unhappy with Abraham, may think her son is dead. If she doesn't know, she has to be a bit concerned. Like, where are they for at least 3 days? It took them 3 days to get there. It's going to take them 3 days to get home. That's 6 days. So, and presumably no word, right? Or we're not told. So that's kind of the situation for Sarah. That's all. We don't hear anything. All we hear is she dies. That's the next thing we hear. Okay. So that's the beginning of this week's Parsha, is the death of Sarah. We are going to start at the triennial beginning of Chaye Sara, which is chapter 24, verse 53 of the book of Genesis. We have Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, who has come to search for a bride for Yitzchak. Abraham wants a bride from their stomping grounds, his and Sarah's stomping grounds, from the people they know, from their family. And so Eliezer is charged with finding this appropriate bride from this family grouping for Yitzchak. We all know that story of him finding Rebecca, who waters all the the caravan and their camels. This woman who's incredibly strong, who runs to fulfill that, who's gracious, who's generous, who's energetic, who takes charge, who welcomes strangers, right? This is Rebecca. And so we are at the point in the story in Chaye Sara where the agreement is being negotiated. It starts with Lavan and Betuel at verse 50. And then it switches, and Betuel kind of disappears. She is Rivka bat Betuel. She is Rebecca, the daughter of Betuel. Her brother is Lavan. So then we see Lavan and his mother involved in the story. We don't know what happens to Betuel, but what we know is that attested in the ancient Near Eastern literature are situations where the mother and her son negotiate the marriage of the daughter, of her daughter, of his sister. This is attested. So the brother of the maiden would have had, if they have standing in the clan, would have, in the patriarchy, would have had a lot of power to negotiate her future. And that is what we see Lavan charged with here. So that was verse 50. We're going to drop down to 53. The deal has been made. So we see at 53, the servant brought out objects of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah, and he gave presents to her brother and her mother. So what is appropriate is to bring out things that will be the way that a bride price is paid for Rivkah, compensating her family for her loss in terms of her services to the family and in terms of offspring. Because she's going to go live patrolocally. She's going to go live with the husband's family. And so all of her children become attached to the husband's family. So the bride price is compensation for the loss of both her service and her children. And so that's what we see happening here. Gifts are given to her mother and her brother. These are traditional gifts. You still see this in many cultures where, right, the groom's family gives gifts to the bride's family. This also proves how wealthy Isaac's family is. This is proving to Rebekah's family that this is a good match, and they are paying a good bride price, and this is a deal for Lavan and for Bethuel. Then he and the men with him ate and drank, and they spent the night. When they arose next morning, he said, "Give me leave to go to my master." But her brother and her mother said, "Let the maiden remain with us some 10 days, then you may go." Traditionally, a bride was feted for a week to 10 days, and they don't want Rebekah to miss out on all the festivities that would have been in her honor. He said to them, "Do not delay me now that God has made my errand successful. Give me leave that I may go to my master." And they said, "Let us call the girl and ask for her reply." This is not about her consent to marry. That arrangement has already been made. He's already paid. It's done. The arrangement here, the go call her and let's ask her, is about, is she willing to give up her parties and to leave right now, to go to a foreign land right now with the kind of no preparation, her trousseau, right, getting ready, like that everything would have just been happening very fast. They ask, let's see if she will give permission. They called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" Meaning right now. Not at all. She has no options, right? She has to go with him. But right now is what the text means. And she said, "I will." So they sent off their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah. She is sent off with her mineket, her wet nurse. So this would have been the nurse that took care of Rebekah since she was born, who nursed her and who watched over her. Often the wet nurse became a guardian for the little one, and just spent their lives essentially protecting and teaching and guiding the girl in their care. And we do have Devorah's name attested in our text, and her burial at a very special place. So Devorah was a beloved member of this family. This is where we see her going off with Rivkah to her new place. Often we have wealthy young women, when they marry, they are given a nurse. And we have this all over the literature. And they bless Rebekah, saying, "Achotenu, our sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes." So we get a bracha for Rivkah that very much parallels the bracha to Avraham, right, of huge fertility. For her, this is the bracha given to her. Then Rebekah and her maids arose, mounted the camels, and followed the man. So the servant took Rivkah and went his way. So now Rebecca's journeying, right, towards Canaan, towards Canaan in this retinue. 62, Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lahai Roi. What do we know about Be'er Lahai Roi? What do we know about that place?
That's
Anybody?
where Ishmael was left. They got the water right there.
So that's where Hagar encounters the Malach. And she calls the place Be'er Lahai Roi, right? About this whole thing about being seen. And I went on seeing after I'd been seen, and the well and all of that. So this is associated with Hagar and Ishmael. For Isaac had settled in the region of the Negev. And this is where the rabbis spend a lot of time wondering what is going on. Verse 63. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot erev. So Isaac goes out. We don't know what exactly this verb is. This is where the major conversation happens. He goes out into the field, and we get the infinitive form, so to blank. And it's the blank we're concerned about, that we're concerned with. He goes out into the field. It says lasuach. And the big conversation is, what does lasuach mean? If you look at the JPS translation as we have it here, it says he went out walking in the field. So lasuach has something to do with walking. Although we don't usually see the word lasuach to mean walking. So what is the etymology of this word? Nobody's sure, but there's a lot of ink spilled trying to deal with this word. So we're going to go to that. Lifnot erev, so just before evening. Vayisa enav. Now remember, this is really important. Abraham lifts his eyes and sees the strangers. Hagar lifts her eyes and sees the well. Now we're going to get it with Yitzchak. He lifts his eyes, and what does Vayar, and what does he see? Vehine gemalim ba'im. Lo, camels approaching. Does he know what this means? Does he know that it's the caravan coming back with his bride? We don't know. Vatisa Rivka et eneha, and now Rivka lifts her eyes. Vatere et Yitzchak, and she sees Yitzchak. Vatipol me'al hagamal. Literally, she fell off her camel. But probably it means she descended from the camel. Like, I find it hard to believe the Torah would talk about our matriarch at this moment falling off her camel. She descends from her camel. Vatomer el ha'eved, and she says to the servant, who is this man? Haholech basadeh, who's walking in the field. So here we do get a word for walking. Now, is he changed what he's done, what he was doing before, and is holeching now? He's walking now? Or is this just another word for what he was doing before? And he was, Barry, I know you're not jumping ahead of me. You're not jumping ahead of me. I know you're not. And it's not from bent over, by the way. Necessarily. Okay. So he is out walking in the field. Who is this guy walking in the field, likratenu, to come meet us? So possibly he has changed what he's doing, and now he sees the camels, he's walking towards them. Vayomer ha'eved, and the servant says, Hu Adoni, he is my master. So what does Rebecca learn in that moment? If she's been fetched to be the bride of his master, and he says, this is my master, then she understands that this is her groom. And the next thing she does, what does she do when she realizes this? She took her veil and covered herself. We do not have attestation in Mesopotamia that women as wives were veiled. We have no record of that. So it would not have been the norm for a woman who was betrothed or married to veil. So the question of commentators is, so what is Rebecca doing here? Like, why does she veil herself? We know Tamar veils herself when she wants to trick Judah, right, into marrying her, into sleeping with her. She veils herself to disguise herself. He mistakes her for a prostitute, right? So possibly prostitutes were veiled. We don't know, but what we do know is that Mesopotamian texts refer to the bride as veiled. So it is possible what's happening right now is Rebecca's told, that's your groom. Rebecca wants to signal to the groom that she is his intended bride, that she's not just anybody, right? She veils to say, I'm the bride. I'm who you've been waiting for. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done, so they get into a conversation. Isaac then brought her, meaning Rebecca, into the tent of his mother Sara. So she goes into the matriarch's tent. She takes possession of the matriarch's tent. Vayikach et Rivka vatihilo. So he takes her and he consummates the marriage in his mother's tent. This makes Rivka now the matriarch. This is an official act of escorting her into the chambers of the queen, if you will, right? And she then becomes the occupant of Sarah's tent. And for only the second time in Torah, we get this verb, v'yahaveh, that he loves her, Isaac loves Rebecca. We usually get, action. We don't get emotion in Torah. Here we're told he loves her. Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. And Isaac is comforted after the death of his mother. It just says acharei imo, after his mother. We can assume it means after her, meaning she's gone, right? And he finds comfort with Rivka. Okay. So let's go back to this idea of lasuach. And Rachel, you can pull up the article, What is Isaac Doing? So what's the first thing we know about this verb is that it is a beloved, what do we love? A hapax legomenon. What is, right? So we learned that lasuach here is a hapax legomenon. This is why it's so hard to translate it, because it is the only time we see this in the Bible. Lasuach is the only, in the Torah, this is the only time we see this verb. It only appears here. If it only appears here, it's very hard then to guess at what it means. And you want to tie it to what it means later, or what it means in Arabic, or what it means, right? You're trying desperately as a translator to figure out where to look for an occasion of the stem of this verb appearing somewhere else. And that's what all of our scholars do. That's what all of both biblical scholars and traditionally the rabbis were trying to do, is figure out, what does this word mean? What's he doing? All right, so if we come down, the Hebrew, that's good. All right, so here we have the Hebrew root, sin, vav, chet, is a hapax, meaning it only appears once in the Bible. If there's something that you are questioning about what does it mean, you go to the BDB. You go to the Brown Driver Briggs Dictionary for Biblical Hebrew to research what this stem might mean. The BDB, like these are Christian Bible scholars who are experts in unpacking, translating Hebrew and other neighboring languages. So they, in the BDB, which is, authoritative for many of us who were taught to use the BDB, assumes that lasuach is a scribal error for sin, vav, tet, to go about. Lasot, to go about. So if it's a scribal error, then what they meant to write was lasot, not lasuach. And this may be the basis of the NJPS translation that we just read, that he's walking about in the field. But it notes, like in our text, it notes that the meaning of the word is uncertain, so that we don't know what it means. Okay. So then we go to ancient translations and say, well, what did they think? people who were closer to this language, or at least inherited a tradition around this and related languages, what did they think? Most translations relate lasuach to the noun sicha, conversation, which is still today in modern Hebrew. You would say we're having a sicha, we're having a conversation. So it's the verbal form of the word sicha, conversation, meaning to make conversation, to talk. Conversation implies what? Two people. Lasuach, to have a conversation, implies you're talking to someone or with someone. The Greek translation, right, the early Greek translation translates lasuach as to meditate. The Vulgate, so the Latin translation, translates it as asad meditandum, in order to meditate. Aramaic targumim, so when it gets translated into Aramaic, are almost universal in translating it litzalea, to pray. Okay? So early on, it gets related to conversation, possibly to meditation, and then in Aramaic, almost universally, it's translated to pray, meaning speaking that's about speaking the longings, the thoughts, the whatever of one's heart in relationship to God. All right. For the rabbis, when are we told he's doing this? He's walking around, or he's talking, or he's doing whatever. We're told he does that right before evening, right? So for the rabbis, they're like, oh, well, this was his custom. He used to go out and do this every day before evening. And so in the Talmud, they assign the morning service to Avraham, because remember, Avraham got up early in the morning and did all this stuff, and so he's davening in the morning. And the evening service is Yaakov, and almost all medieval Jewish commentators, both Rashi and Sforno, among others, support this understanding as lasuach, as to pray, and Isaac is which service? Mincha, the late afternoon service, is attributed, because of this verse, to Isaac. Isaac every day would go out at this time and he would pray. He would meditate and pray in the field. He's a nice yeshiva bucher who knows it's time to daven in the afternoon, or he's just kind of a dreamy spiritual guy, and like this is what he does, and he has a deep, rich inner life. I just read a commentary from Institute for Jewish Spirituality, Larry Bach, who says, whatever the interpretation, clearly Isaac is a really spiritual guy with this rich inner life. You'll see that I don't agree. Okay. Shocking, I know. So Ibn Ezra, one of our medieval exegetes, says no. It doesn't mean praying or meditating. Lasuach, he says, is lalechet ben hasichim. So he says lasuach has to do with sichim, bushes. He's bushing. So what does that mean? He's out walking amongst the bushes. He's walking among the foliage, the shrubbery out in the field. And he sees it as a cognate from the Arabic sacha, to travel about. Okay? So in the medieval context, this term meant a long-distance spiritual journey. Ibn Ezra, who was fluent in Arabic, and often referred to that language as Lashon Yishmael, the language of Ishmael, the language of Hagar, here in his commentary, in his grammatical studies, knows that in Arabic, sacha is to travel. Okay? But we have no proof of what the word comes from. Is it related to Arabic? Is it related to bushes? Is it related to conversation? We don't know. All right. So it would seem then that Ibn Ezra, right, is going to the Arabic derivation and only looking there. Rachel, you can come down. Okay? So why does he not talk about the Hebrew verb, right, which also has a religious connotation? He probably wants to emphasize a Hebrew derivation for lasuach, this verb we have. So he implies that the Hebrew verb comes from the Hebrew noun sichim, bushes. Right? He wants to give it a Hebrew root, not an Arabic root. He wants to say, no, this is Hebrew, but he knows the Arabic means to want to walk around, but he's got to tie that back to Hebrew, so he comes up with sichim, bushes. So the scholars are stretching to try to figure out what's going on. Why is he working so hard to make this mean walk around? Why doesn't even Ezra just go with, okay, so maybe he's praying? I'm curious about that part of this whole argument through the ages, is what are people's agendas in translating it walking around versus praying or meditating, right? So Rashbam talks about lasuach basadeh. He's lasuaching, whatever that means, basadeh, in the field. Klomar, that is to say, lata'at ilanot, to plant trees. Ularot inyane po'alav, and to look into, to investigate the doings of his workers. So Isaac is going about the family business. He's the patriarch's son. He's inheriting everything. He's the only heir. He's the heir apparent. He's going out to see what's going on with the workers. That's what a good estate boss does, right? Is go out. He's helping. He's planting. He's doing stuff. He's working with them. He's working alongside them. He wants to supervise the work. He's being a responsible son who's inheriting the family dry good business, right? Or the Shmata factory. He's going to investigate and take charge of and be responsible for and involved in the family business that he's going to inherit. So think about what that means for Rashbam. What's Rashbam's agenda with Isaac? To translate it this way, what's your agenda about Isaac? So we're going to talk about all of these. So remember, he's either walking around, he's either looking into the family business and participating in the family business, or he is meditating, praying. All right? You've got an agenda in interpreting this verb one of these ways. So you can come down. Thank you. Radak, here we go with Radak. Rabbi David Kimchi of Provence, another medieval exegete, another medieval famous commentator. Isaac went out lasuach basadeh. Have we said lasuach? That's the word we're concerned with. Basadeh, in the field. Klomar, that is to say, l'tayel ben asichim, to travel, to journey among the sichim, the bushes. So another exegete supporting Ibn Ezra's interpretation that this means he's walking around between the bushes. Based on Hebrew, sichim, lasuach comes from that. Okay, so when we look at the Malbim, a later commentator, much later, 1809 to 1879, it's trying to fuse these. During the time for afternoon prayer, he went out lasuach, in the field. What this means is to be alone there and to pour out his speech before God. For it has become clear to me that siach refers to speech. Barry's going to push the bending thing. He really is. Okay. Refers to speech thoughts that shoot from one's imagination. Okay? So one imagines as one is in relationship to the divine, and this is conversation that just kind of jumps out of your mouth. It jumps out of your head. You just can't help yourself. That you're so into it that these thoughts just come out of your mouth. And in that sense, it's about talking. Okay. So in Torah Tmima, Baruch Epstein, 1860 to 1942, we have not found in any place that the word lasuach means to travel about. Tiyul, like our guy just said. Why is he saying l'tayel? We don't have indications of that anywhere. Therefore, certainly there is no meaning here, as many explain l'tayel in the field. The rabbi's explanation is the only true literal one. Meaning the rabbi's explanation is that he is praying in the field is the only legit one. Okay, Rachel, you can stop sharing. So even if Barry's right and it's something about bending over, and in that sense, prayer or whatever, what's the agenda right here for folks? Right? What's the agenda? If he's walking around in the field, what does that suggest about Isaac? He's just yelling. He's out there wandering around in the field. What does that suggest? People who want to translate it that way, what are they getting? What does that mean about Isaac? Mark?
I'm wondering why the word is lifted up and separated from the Rebecca-Isaac connection.
I don't understand.
Rebecca's moving toward Isaac. Isaac's with the camel moving toward Rebecca.
He's walking.
And now we're focusing on this word. Why isn't it interpreted in the context of this shidduch?
Because this is happening before he sees her. He's lasuaching in the field before he sees the camels. Yes, Bert.
The women's Torah translation, they use strolling.
So in the women's Torah commentary, he's strolling.
But when he's coming towards Rebecca, he is striding.
Okay, so lasuach is to stroll, but once he sees Rebecca, lalechet means he's
really going.
He's going. Okay, so he is striding. Lalechet means to walk, but right. So the women's Torah commentary, what's their agenda about Isaac? That he's one way before he sees his bride, and he is way another way. He is way more peppy, right, and way more into whatever he's doing when he's doing it after having seen Rebecca. Okay, so there's an agenda that makes Isaac excited, right? And the women's Torah commentary here has Isaac. I mean, if you're striding, either he's being bossy. Oh, there's my woman. I'm gonna go show her who's boss. Or he's super excited, but they clearly have a change in him before and after he sees his intended.
But if he was praying or meditating, probably it would have said he stopped and then he went to her.
Okay,
this almost implies that he was strolling and then increased the pace.
Okay, so Bert is going to suggest that the women's Torah commentary is obviously interpreting against that he's praying because he would have had to stop that to do something else. Okay, Dana?
I was just questioning what exactly is Isaac thinking when he's walking, striding, and that's what all these commentators and translators are trying to infer. What is Isaac thinking before he sees Rachel?
Rebecca, yeah, before he sees her.
I mean, Rebecca.
So what?
He could be thinking about his mom. He could be thinking about his dad. He could be thinking about her. He could be thinking about the area where his brother was, right? So there's a lot they don't know.
Right. So part of my question always is why are the rabbis, and I just gave you a smattering, right, from this one article. You can imagine how many more arguments there are for and against a certain interpretation. Why are they so fixated on what he was doing? Right? Obviously, if there's this much written about it, they don't talk about lalechet. We know what lalechet means. He walks over to her, right? So, but where there's this hapex legomenon where we don't know, they're very interested in, to go to your point, Dana, the rabbinic tradition is very interested in what's going on with Isaac when he's alone, right? When he's just a dude, what kind of man is he? We don't know. We're not told very much about Isaac. We get the Akedah, we get the death of Sara. We're told that he's comforted after the death of his mother by Rebecca, which means he's upset. Right? To be comforted means you're in a state of discomfort. So obviously, he missed Sara. He was deeply connected to Sara, and now has some comfort because he has Rebecca. But that's all we know. He could be in mourning. Maybe he's wandering because he's out there going, how am I supposed to live in a world without her?
psychologists, I'm sure, can have a field day.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, where's Fish? Where all those people are supposed to weigh in from a psychological perspective, people? Where are you? Sleeping. You're sleeping.
Went to his mother's tent.
Right?
His wife.
Right? Tachshit behavior, very un-Jewish. Walking around. I'm not sure what that means. Mark Fish, speak.
I was wondering then what the relationship between Isaac and Abraham is at this point, and how that affects him, and that they're living now in the area where Ishmael was, not where Rebekah was.
So lovely, Mark. Thank you for introducing that dynamic, because for my preference of interpretation, which I haven't told you yet, for my preference of interpretation, we have to take seriously what's going on with Abraham.
Yes.
We have to take seriously that Abraham took him at 8 days and had him circumcised, something not known to his clan. And what else did he? And Isaac must know that. He sees his own penis, I would assume. He knows he's circumcised and who did that to him. So that's number one. Number two, he went up 3-day walk. Dad raises the knife because an invisible voice told him to slaughter his son. He's bound on the altar, tied on the wood. Dad's raising the knife, and now an invisible voice says, no. Didn't mean it. What does that mean for Isaac? What does that mean for Isaac, the only heir to his father, that he's willing to kill him because some invisible God said to, and then decides, oh, no, that's not what God meant, because an invisible messenger of God said don't do it. How is this experience from Isaac's perspective? I can't help but think it is a deep trauma that doesn't go away. And the person who loved him and protected him and would have kept him safe from this lunatic was his mother, was Sara. And when Sara dies, Isaac loses his only sense of safety in a world where Abraham is the patriarch, where this guy who's done these things to him is in charge of everything and everybody. All right, so that's going to play key into how I prefer to translate this. But someone else had their hand up. Shelley, you had your hand up.
I did. I was confused. The way I understood it, Rebekah arriving happened before Sarah's death.
No.
The other way around.
No. Sara dies at the beginning of Chaye Sara. And now we get Rivka at the end of this parsha. So yeah, no.
So that then makes sense that, he's grieving, he's lost his main support, the person who protected him, and sees Rebekah as the person he can cling to. Someone's there for him, right? Now, she's the most important woman in his life.
Yes. That's, what I think is happening here. So if you translate this as praying, you want because everyone's got an agenda in how they translate, and myself included, obviously. If you have him praying, you want an Isaac who's a deeply spiritual person, who's going to head this clan, who has a special covenant relationship with Yahweh. I totally understand the instinct of the rabbis to make Isaac a yeshiva bucher who's davening at mincha. I totally understand that instinct. I don't buy it. I think it's, for me, and the idea that he's out there supervising his father's stuff, okay, but we're not told he's doing that. We're not told he's checking in on the workers. He's doing that. We're told he's just lasuach basadeh. And so for me, and I have an agenda too, I think Isaac has been deeply traumatized. I think Isaac, after the death of his mother, is completely lost. Yes, to David. I think he is emotionally scarred forever by Abraham's strange behavior, his violent behavior. I think he is seriously scarred and damaged. And I think he's wandering around in the field. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He is completely at a loss. If he's with the men and he's back home, he is directly under Abraham's gaze. Who knows what Abraham could do next, decide to do next? I think he wants to be as far from that city center, the center of Abraham's world. He wants to be as far away from that as possible. Maybe he's talking to himself, right? My sense of Isaac is that he's lost and that he is traumatized. And the death of his mother means his only protector is gone. And he doesn't know anything about life except that he's supposed to marry some person that Eliezer is supposed to go get. And he's out wandering aimlessly. And when he sees Rebekah, something changes. He heads for her, likrotam, it says in the text, to greet them, to meet them. Maybe because that's what's polite. Maybe that's what's expected of, the son of the patriarch. The heir apparent is to go meet the retinue as it comes back. That's all fine. But what we're told is that he loves Rebekah. So for me, the agenda is about finally some comfort for Isaac. That he's been lost. And when he sees and comes to and greets Rebekah and brings her into the tent of his mother, he is comforted and he loves her for that. Or he loves her and that's why he's comforted. But for me, that's my agenda, is that I want to see Isaac rescued from his, because there's no way you can tell me he wasn't traumatized by what his father did to him. There's no way you'll ever convince me of that. Ever. The rabbis want to say he was old enough to agree. He went willingly. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I think it's a terrible story that way. I think Isaac is lost, and in this partnership with this strong, dynamic, compassionate, wonderful, energetic, loving woman, he's comforted. And I want that for Isaac.
In addition to all the emotional trauma he's been through, he's also saying, I would think, what a lot of people think before they get married. Do I really want to do this? Is this something that's going to help me in the rest of my life? Are we going to be a companionable couple? All of these things. So that's the other emotion to go along with it, in addition to what would my mother think about all. I hope that it would make her happy. So
then how would you want to translate what he's doing in the field?
Trying to decide, talk to himself. I agree. I think he's talking to himself. What am I getting myself into? Where I've just come from. And there's a lot of emotions in all of those things. And I think a lot of individuals, men or women or anybody who's getting married, goes through all these emotions, and then with all these other previous emotions, I'd want to go hide under the bushes.
I want to go hide under the bushes, she says. He might have gone on the walk willingly to be tied up to see his father. What? But I doubt he was willing to be tied up. Well, the rabbis say if he's old enough to agree to go, he's old enough to fight getting on the wood. So he succumbs. He voluntarily succumbs, or he could have fought his father. I don't know about you, but, right, fighting your father in the ancient world, A, but B, that your father's willing to do this to you, that he asks you to get on the wood, right? Even if he agrees, how does that make it any better, right? That your father is asking you voluntarily or involuntarily, if you don't get up there, my servant's here. Well, I'm gonna kill you. That's literally, there's just no part of that story that makes any kind of anything. Okay, Mark? Okay, wait, but for what Linda said, right, he's got a lot going on. He's anticipating the arrival of his bride. Who sent their servant to pick the bride? Whose servant went to pick the bride?
Abraham's.
Abraham's servant went to choose the bride. If it doesn't go well with this bride, how do you think Isaac feels about that possibility? Right? He knows Dad. And he knows what Dad's capable of. Dad has gone to, his agent has gone to choose his fiance. Very likely he's out there going, I hope this works. Because if not, he's had some experiences with Abraham. Mark?
Well, as much as I'd like to disagree with you, I agree. If you look at 62, the sentence immediately before.
So we're looking at 62.
Now Isaac came from having gone to bear, Ishmael's place, and he dwelt in the Negev. So it's consistent with your thesis that he's wandering around trying to find his place. He went to where Ishmael saw God. So I just find the sentence supportive of your.
So Mark finds verse 62 supporting this idea that Isaac's kind of wandering around trying to figure out where his place in the world is. And, he goes back to Be'er L'chai Ro'i, where Hagar encounters God and the Malach, and Ishmael is saved, right? Okay, so I don't know if that's still David's comment. It's very hard for me to read the chat here in the sanctuary. So, that Abraham could be deranged, right? And then we had to convince ourselves it was okay to make the ultimate sacrifice. That's absolutely what the tradition did with the Akedah story. And I promise you, Bert, I have a big sticky note on my folder that the next time we come to the Parsha, we will be doing the Akedah, and looking at some of the ways our tradition has tried to make it okay what happened with Abraham saying yes to the test. Because the question ultimately is, because the Torah uses the word test. God tested Abraham. Right? Nisa is the word, test. So the question is, did Abraham pass or fail the test, right? Mark.
Well, the other thing that strikes me is it's not textual in a sense, but one would imagine that after all of this, with the trauma not only of what's happened with Abraham, but the loss of Sarah, one would have to imagine, I think, that what Isaac is doing is ruminating about these kinds of things, and that Rebecca seems to be presented as someone who's very similar to Sarah.
Yes, and very similar to Sarah, the way we've read Sarah. Who else is Rebecca very similar to? The rabbis jump to she's very similar to Abraham. She's willing to leave her family, leave her homeland, leave everything familiar, go to a new place, right? She is Avraham in the feminine. Yitzchak is a little yeshiva bucher. Yeah. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's like completely a nebisha yeshiva bucher. She is the new leader. She is Avraham.
Right.
Chesed. Abraham is associated in the tradition with chesed, loving kindness, the way she waters the camels, and so she is seen as the embodiment of Abraham. And that's what keeps things moving in the direction God wants, is that Isaac gets a new Abraham as his partner. So, but very, very good, Mark. But I would say yes, she's very much like Sara, the way we've been reading Sara. I have to believe Sara would approve. Right? David, you want to say something?
Yeah, Amy, what follows, I think in my mind, your interpretation of this parsha, and it's almost scary to me, is that I think that Abraham is deranged, that he's literally lost it. And what does that mean when the patriarch of our religion is viewed as nuts?
Well, it certainly changes a lot of things. Now, the tradition doesn't see him as nuts. The tradition sees him as talking to God. And Barry wants to try to argue what the tradition argues. It's not that God wanted to kill the boy. Of course not. That's silly. It's that God wants Abraham to want to do God's will. That doesn't help me at all, by the way, Barry. What? I'm supposed to want to kill my son because God wants it, even though, don't worry, God doesn't really want it. But I should be ready to do it for God. I mean, it's just, it doesn't help for some of us. For me, we'll get there in 3 years. Okay, Lisa?
I was just going to say also, I believe that after the Akedah, God never talks to Abraham again, never speaks to him again, which pretty much says a lot about the choice he made and the fact that maybe we don't believe in human sacrifice because you made the wrong choice.
Okay.
It's not the way to go. So.
Right? And so I know Barry's trying to over here. He's still going. He's saying our civilization needed some way to stay away from this. This text does not say stay away from this. This text doesn't say that. This text says, in this case, God didn't want it. But Abraham passed the test, so says the tradition, because he was willing to go there. And he was willing to do it. I'm sorry. That does not in any way argue for me. It's not a polemic against don't ever do this. Nowhere does it say it's wrong. Nowhere. It says don't do it, don't harm him, period. Even though a minute ago I asked you to. 3 days ago I asked you to.
And the fact that God has nothing more to do with him after that doesn't impress you at all?
What? Say what?
The fact that God doesn't speak to him anymore and they go down the mountain separately, that doesn't speak to you at all about something?
Yes, that does. I'm arguing with Barry. Barry. Yes, it speaks to me. And it says to me he flunked the test.
Yes, he flunked the test.
He failed the test.
Yes.
Yes.
Unless the test was that he was supposed to argue with God. Because remember...
Then he failed the test.
Right.
Yes.
Abraham argued.
That's right.
How could you kill? You are the just God.
That's right. How could you kill the innocent along with the guilty? That's right. I agree. My reading, I've already given away 3 years from now, I think he flunked the test.
So we're supposed to argue with God.
Yes. Yes. And like Lisa said, God says, you know what? You failed. So I'm done. I'm going to pick somebody else to talk to. All right, lots to sit with, lots to hold. But what we can know, what helps me sleep leaving this parsha, is that Yitzchak loves Rivka. And he is comforted. And Rivka is with him. How this is working for Rivka, Torah is not interested. But we know Rivka becomes the mother of, the heir to Yitzchak. That's a whole nother story. Stay tuned.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.